A 15-year-old boy sang on the streets every night to pay for rent and his sick mother's bills. But when a passing businessman heard his voice, the sky was barely lightening when Ethan Collins opened his eyes. The stillness of the early morning was only broken by his mother, Sarah's, labored breathing from the next room. He sighed, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his young shoulders. "Another day," he murmured to himself, running his hands over his face to push away sleep. "Let's go, Ethan. Mom needs you." Dragging himself out of bed, Ethan headed to the kitchen. The sound of the kettle and the aroma of cheap coffee soon filled the small apartment. As he prepared breakfast, his thoughts wandered. How will I pay the rent this month? And Mom's new medications? Maybe if I sing a few more hours. His thoughts were interrupted by a dull thud from the bathroom. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat. "Mom?" he called, rushing toward the sound. "Mom!" Opening the door, he found Sarah collapsed on the cold bathroom floor, pale and trembling. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm sorry, dear. I just wanted to—" "Shh, it's okay," Ethan soothed her, his tone contrasting with the panic in his eyes. "Let's get you back to bed, okay?" With effort, he helped Sarah back to bed, her thin body weighing more than it should from weakness. "Your medications," Ethan remembered, rushing to fetch them. As Sarah took the pills, the doorbell rang. Ethan froze, recognizing the insistent pattern of the knocks. "Don't answer," Sarah pleaded, but Ethan knew they had no choice. Opening the door, he was met with the scowling face of Mr. Thompson, the landlord. "Ethan," he began bluntly, "the rent is late, again." "Mr. Thompson, please," Ethan implored, his voice low so Sarah wouldn't hear. "Just a few more days, I promise that—" "Promises don't pay my bills, boy," Thompson interrupted, his voice rising. "Either you pay by the end of the week or you're out on the street. Understand?" Ethan nodded, feeling his stomach sink. "Yes, sir, we'll pay." Closing the door, he leaned his forehead against the cool wood, taking deep breaths to hold back tears. "Ethan?" Sarah's voice called from the bedroom. "Is everything okay, dear?" "Everything's great, Mom," he replied, forcing a cheerful tone. "Just the mailman." Looking at the clock, Ethan realized he was late for school. Grabbing his backpack and guitar, he gave Sarah a quick kiss. "I'll be back soon. Rest, okay?" On the street, Ethan hurried along, barely registering the greetings from neighbors. His mind was a whirlwind of worries. Arriving at school, he slipped into his classroom, hoping to go unnoticed. But as soon as he sat down, the reality of his situation hit him like a wave. His breathing became rapid and shallow, the world around him beginning to spin. "Ethan!" A soft voice cut through his panic. It was Lily Chen, his classmate. "Ethan, look at me! Breathe with me, okay?" Gently, she guided his breathing, her hands holding his. "That's right," she encouraged. "Slowly. You're safe." Gradually, the world came back into focus. Ethan looked at Lily, gratitude and shame mixing in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Sometimes it's too much, you know?" Lily nodded, understanding. "I know, but you're not alone, Ethan. Remember that." The hours of class dragged on, each minute torture for Ethan. His eyes constantly drifted to the clock, anxious to get home and check on his mother. During the break, he isolated himself in a corner of the yard, absent-mindedly strumming his guitar. "Hey, Collins!" a mocking voice called out. It was Brad, the school bully. "Gonna play on the corner today? My grandma needs a lullaby." Laughter echoed through the yard. Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to respond. Instead, he began to play louder, letting the music drown out the taunts. When the bell rang, Ethan was the first out the door. On his way home, he stopped at the local pharmacy. "Hi, Mrs. Martinez," he greeted the pharmacist. "Have my mom's medications arrived?" Mrs. Martinez's compassionate gaze made his heart tighten. I'm sorry, Ethan. We still don't have authorization from the health plan. Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Another hurdle. Another worry. Arriving home, he found Sarah asleep. Silently, he began to tidy the apartment, mentally preparing for another night of music on the streets. The symphony of despair continued, but Ethan was determined not to let it defeat him. Not while his mother needed him. The sound of an out-of-tune piano echoed through the school corridor as Ethan entered the music room. Ms. Martinez, with her gray hair pinned up in a loose bun, smiled upon seeing him. "Ethan, right on time. Ready for another lesson?" He nodded, picking up his guitar. As he tuned the strings, other students arrived, filling the room with the buzz of conversations and the sound of instruments being prepared. "Today," Ms. Martinez began, her melodious voice capturing everyone's attention, "we will work on—" A sudden cough interrupted her. She covered her mouth with her hand, her body shaking with the effort. Ethan frowned, concerned. "Ms. Martinez?" he asked hesitantly. "Are you okay?" She waved her hand, catching her breath. "I'm fine, dear. Just a throat irritation." But Ethan noticed the handkerchief she discreetly tucked into her pocket, stained red. The class continued, the sound of various instruments blending into a cacophony that slowly transformed into music. Ethan lost himself in the notes, his fingers dancing across the guitar strings. For a moment, he forgot his worries, carried away by the melody. "Excellent, Ethan," Ms. Martinez praised, her voice interrupted by another mild cough. "You have a special gift." Her words awakened a memory. Suddenly, Ethan was no longer in the classroom, but in his old home, 5 years earlier. "You have a gift, son," his father had said, handing him a battered guitar. "This was mine when I was your age. Now it's yours." Young Ethan, only 10 years old, hugged the instrument, his eyes sparkling with happiness. "Thank you, Dad. I'll practice every day." "I'm sure you will," his father smiled, ruffling his hair. "Maybe one day you'll become a great musician." The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving a bitter taste. That very night, his father had left, taking the family's savings with him and leaving behind only debts and broken hearts. The harsh sound of the school bell brought Ethan back to the present. The students began to pack up their instruments, leaving the room in lively groups. Ethan lingered, watching Ms. Martinez organize some sheet music. "Ms. Martinez?" he called out hesitantly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She turned, smiling despite the paleness of her face. "Of course, Ethan. What is it?" I wanted to thank you," he began, the words coming out with difficulty. "For everything you've done for me. The extra lessons, the advice." "Oh, Ethan," she interrupted, her voice gentle. "You don't need to thank me. It's a pleasure to see you grow as a musician and as a person." There was a pause, the silence heavy between them. "Is there something else?" Miss Martinez asked kindly. Ethan hesitated, then decided to be direct. "You're sick, aren't you?" Her smile faltered for a moment. "Ah, Ethan, always so observant." She sighed, sitting at the piano. "Yes, I'm sick. Cancer. The doctors found out a few weeks ago." Shock hit Ethan like a punch. But you'll be okay, right? There's treatment?" "I'm fighting," she replied, her voice tremulous but determined. "But I want you to know, Ethan, no matter what happens, your music, your talent, that's something no one can take away from you." Ethan felt tears burn his eyes. Another person he loved, suffering. Another battle he couldn't fight. "Now go," Ms. Martinez said, forcing a smile. "I don't want you to be late for your next class because of me." Ethan left the room feeling numb. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and before he knew it, he was at his usual spot on Main Street, guitar in hand. The first notes of his song floated through the night air. Busy passers-by hardly noticed the young musician, too caught up in their own lives. Ethan sang, his voice laden with emotion, each word a prayer for better days. Suddenly, a shrill sound of screeching tires cut through the night. Ethan looked up in time to see two cars colliding violently at the nearby intersection. The sound of twisting metal and breaking glass filled the air, followed by screams of panic. Without thinking, Ethan dropped his guitar and ran toward the accident. People were already gathering around, some calling for emergency services, others trying to help. "Someone call an ambulance?" a voice shouted. Approaching one of the cars, Ethan saw a woman trapped in the driver's seat, blood trickling down her face. "Hey," he called gently, leaning in closer. "Stay calm, okay? Help is on the way." The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "It hurts. It hurts a lot," she moaned. "I know," Ethan replied, his voice trembling slightly. "But it'll be okay. What's your name?" "Linda," she whispered. "Linda, I'm Ethan. I'll stay here with you until the ambulance arrives, okay?" Not knowing what else to do, Ethan began to sing softly, a soothing melody. Gradually, he saw the fear in Linda's eyes diminish, her breathing calm. In the distance, the sound of sirens approached. Ethan continued singing, his voice an anchor in the storm of chaos around him. In that moment, he understood. His music was more than a means to earn money. It was a gift, a way to bring light even in the darkest moments. As the sirens drew closer, Ethan made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, he would use his voice, his music, to make a difference. Somehow, some way, he would turn this symphony of despair into a song of hope. The sun had barely risen when a black Mercedes glided through the sleepy streets of Millbrook. At the wheel, Marcus Harding adjusted his sunglasses, his astute eyes scanning the rural landscape. "There must be some hidden talent in this backwater," he murmured to himself. "Something different." Marcus was not a man of faith, but of calculations. Each of his moves was meticulously planned, every discovery carefully orchestrated. Millbrook was just another dot on his map, another stop in his relentless search for the next big hit. As night fell, Marcus prowled the city streets, his ears alert for any promising sound. That's when he heard it. A voice. Crystal clear, pure, laden with emotion that seemed beyond the years of its owner. Following the sound, Marcus found himself at the corner of Main Street. There, under the dim light of a lamppost, was Ethan. His fingers danced across the guitar strings, his voice rising into the night like a prayer. "Incredible," Marcus whispered, feeling that familiar stir of anticipation. He had found something special. He waited until Ethan finished his song, watching as the few passers-by tossed coins into his open guitar case. Then, with determined steps, he approached. "That was quite a performance, kid," Marcus said, his voice soft but authoritative. Ethan looked up, surprised. "Thank you, sir." "Marcus Harding." He extended his hand, his smile calculated to inspire confidence. "Ever thought about making this more than a hobby?" Ethan's eyes widened. You're in the music industry?" Marcus laughed, the sound rich and infectious. "You could say that. I have an eye for talent, and you, my young friend, have something special." He paused dramatically, watching hope grow in Ethan's eyes. "How about we talk about your future?" In the next few minutes, Marcus painted a dazzling picture. Recording studios in Nashville, tours across the country, Ethan's name in lights, and, of course, money. Lots of money. "Think about what this could mean," Marcus said, his voice low and persuasive. "The best medical treatments for your mother. Never worrying about bills or late rent again." Ethan was stunned. It was everything he dreamed of, everything he needed. served on a silver platter. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Say yes, Marcus smiled. Let me change your life. Suddenly, a piercing sound cut through the air, breaking glass, coming from the direction of Ethan's home. Mom! Ethan cried out, his face paling. Go, Marcus said quickly. Think about my offer. I'll be in town for a few days. Ethan barely heard him, already running towards his home, his heart pounding in his chest. Upon arrival, he found Sarah on the kitchen floor, shards of glass scattered around her. Mom, what happened? He asked, kneeling beside her. I'm sorry, dear, Sarah murmured, her voice weak. I just wanted a glass of water. I got dizzy. Carefully, Ethan helped Sarah back to bed, guiding her to lie down. As he tended to her, his mind whirled. Marcus's offer, the chance for a better life, the possibility of giving his mother the care she deserved. But leaving her, going to Nashville? The thought made his stomach churn. Ethan? Sarah's voice brought him back to the present. Is everything okay, son? He forced a smile. Everything's great, Mom, just thinking. That night, lying in his bed, Ethan couldn't sleep. Marcus's voice echoed in his mind, painting pictures of a bright future. But the image of his mother, fragile and needing him, haunted him. The bluish glow of the computer screen illuminated Ethan's focused face in the school library. His fingers flew over the keyboard, frantically researching musical careers and, more urgently, advanced medical treatments. Nashville, the country music capital, he murmured to himself. Opportunities, fierce competition. His eyes widened at the average cost of living in the city. It was more than he had ever imagined. But then, the figures from major record deals made him gulp. It was more money than his family had ever seen. Switching to another tab, Ethan typed in his mother's symptoms, desperately searching for some hope, some miraculous treatment that could save her. Hours passed, and frustration grew with each click. Hey, a gentle voice surprised him. It was Lily, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. Ethan smiled gratefully, accepting the coffee. Thanks, Lily. His phone rang, interrupting him. The hospital's name flashed on the screen. Hello? Ethan answered, his heart racing. Dr. Thompson's grave voice came through. Ethan, we need to talk about your mother. Can you come to the hospital now? Ethan's world seemed to freeze. I'm on my way, he responded mechanically. Hanging up, he looked at Lily, panic evident in his eyes. Go, she said, understanding immediately. I'll take care of your things here. Ethan ran through the streets of Millbrook, his chest burning not just from the physical effort. Upon reaching the hospital, Dr. Thompson was waiting with a serious expression. Ethan, he began, guiding him to a quieter corner. Your mother's condition has worsened. She needs emergency surgery. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. But she'll be okay, right? After the surgery? The doctor hesitated. The surgery is complicated, Ethan. And there's another problem. Your insurance doesn't cover this procedure. The words hit Ethan like a punch. How much? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. When Dr. Thompson mentioned the amount, Ethan felt the world spin. It was more than they could gather in years. Isn't there another option? Ethan pleaded, tears forming in his eyes. I'm sorry, Ethan. Without the surgery, Dr. Thompson didn't need to finish the sentence. Staggering out of the hospital, Ethan barely registered where he was going. His mind was a whirlwind of desperate thoughts. How could he raise so much money? How could he save his mother? Night fell over Millbrook, and Ethan found himself at his usual performing spot. Almost mechanically, he began to play, his voice laden with raw emotion that drew more listeners than usual. Coins and a few bills fell into his case, but Ethan knew it wouldn't be enough. It would never be enough. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, he faced a rough-looking man. "Hey, kid," the man growled. "This is my spot now. Scram!" Ethan tried to argue, explain that he always played there. But before he could react, he felt a strong push. He fell, his guitar hitting the ground with a painful sound of cracking wood. The man grabbed Ethan's case, flipping it and letting all the money he had earned that night fall out. "This is mine now," he laughed, collecting the bills and coins. Ethan watched, powerless, as the fruits of hours of work disappeared into the stranger's hands. When he finally managed to stand up, the man had vanished into the darkness. With a heavy heart and empty pockets, Ethan picked up his damaged guitar. On his way home, his phone rang again. It was Ms. Martinez. "Ethan," her voice sounded weak. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but—" "Ms. Martinez, what's wrong?" "I'm in the hospital, dear. Things got a bit worse. Don't worry, I'll be fine, but—" Ethan felt as if the world were crumbling around him. His mother needing expensive surgery, his money stolen, his guitar broken, and now Ms. Martinez hospitalized. Arriving home, Ethan collapsed on the couch, tears finally flowing freely. That's when he noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. Pressing the button, he heard the confident, smooth voice of Marcus Harding. "Ethan, it's Marcus. I've been thinking about our talk. I want you to know that the offer still stands. In fact, I'm willing to increase it. Think about what this could mean for you and your mother. Call me when you decide to make the leap to a better life." The beep of the message's end echoed in the silent apartment. Ethan sat there, motionless, his mind a turmoil of conflicting emotions. Marcus's offer had never seemed so tempting, and so frightening. With the weight of the world on his young shoulders, Ethan wondered how he could possibly make a decision that would forever change the course of his life. The future, once a horizon of possibilities, now seemed a dark and uncertain abyss. The room was shrouded in twilight when Ethan finally woke up, his head throbbing after a night of restless sleep. The events of the previous day weighed on him like an anchor, pulling him into the depths of despair. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he buried his face in his hands, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. "What do I do?" he murmured to himself, his voice choked. "How can I choose between my mother and my future?" From the next room, he heard a faint moan. Sarah was awake and likely in pain. Ethan quickly got up, ignoring his own exhaustion. "Good morning, Mom," he said, forcing a smile as he entered her room. "How are you feeling?" Sarah tried to sit up, her face twisted in pain. "I've had better days, dear," she replied with a weak smile. "But seeing your face always makes me feel better." Ethan helped her adjust, his heart tightening as he saw how much she had weakened in recent weeks. As he assisted her with her morning medications, he couldn't stop thinking about the surgery she needed, the mountain of money they didn't have. "Ethan," Sarah said softly, taking his hand, "there's something bothering you. I can see it in your eyes." For a moment, Ethan considered lying, protecting her from the truth. But the burden was too much to bear alone. "Mom," he began, his voice trembling. I received an offer from a music producer. He wants to take me to Nashville, make me a star." Sarah's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and pride shining in them. "Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful. I always knew your talent would take you far. But—" Ethan hesitated, tears forming in his eyes. "I would have to leave you here." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Ethan, my love," she finally said, her voice steady despite her weakness. "You need to go." "What? No, Mom, I can't leave you like this." "Listen to me," Sarah insisted, squeezing his hand. "Since your father left us, you've carried a burden no child should bear. You've sacrificed so much for me. But now is your chance to live your dreams." "But what about you? And your treatment?" Ethan asked, tears now streaming down his face. "We'll find a way," Sarah smiled, though her own eyes were moist. "We always have, haven't we?" Before Ethan could respond, a thunderous roar shook the house. Through the window, they saw dark clouds approaching rapidly. "Looks like a storm is coming," Sarah commented, trying to change the subject. Ethan nodded absently, his mind still processing the conversation. He stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the wind began to howl, trees bending under its force. Suddenly, a deafening crash made Ethan jump. A tile had come loose, falling dangerously close to the window. "Mom, stay here," he said, rushing out of the room. "I'm going to check the roof." In the attic, Ethan found a desolate scene. Several tiles had come loose, and rainwater was already starting to seep in. He desperately tried to cover the holes with whatever was at hand, but it was a losing battle against the elements. Soaked and defeated, Ethan descended. Another expense they couldn't afford. Another problem that seemed insurmountable. That night, determined to earn some money for repairs, Ethan went out to sing despite the storm. The wind howled, muffling his voice. The rain lashed his face, mixing with the tears he could no longer contain. Few passers-by ventured out that night, and those who did ran, barely noticing the drenched young musician. After hours of battling the elements, Ethan returned home, his pockets nearly empty, his spirit broken. Upon entering, he found a surprise waiting for him. His father, absent for years, was sitting in the living room, talking with Sarah. "Ethan." The man stood up, a hesitant smile on his face. "Son, What are you doing here?" Ethan interrupted, his voice cold. "I heard about your mother," he replied, seeming genuinely concerned. "I came to see if I could help." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Help? Now? After all these years?" "Ethan," Sarah called softly, "your father is offering to pay for my surgery?" For a moment, Ethan felt a wave of relief. But then, he saw the look on his father's face. There was a price for this help. "What do you want in return?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking with contained anger. His father hesitated, then said, "I want you to come live with me, in Chicago. Leave your mother in the care of professionals. It's best for everyone." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan looked at his mother, seeing the pain and confusion in her eyes. Then, without a word, he walked out, slamming the door behind him. Outside, the storm continued, but Ethan barely felt the rain. His mind was a turmoil of conflicting emotions. Marcus's offer, his mother's plea for him to pursue his dreams, his father's manipulative proposal. Picking up his guitar, Ethan began to play, his voice rising above the howl of the wind. It was a song of pain, of loss, of shattered dreams. And as he sang, he wondered if he would ever find a way out of the maze of despair that his life had become. The room was plunged into an eerie half-light, illuminated only by the bluish glow of Ethan's laptop. His fingers trembled over the keyboard as he navigated through a series of recently discovered audio files. His heart pounded furiously in his chest, as if sensing the dark truth about to be unveiled. With a hesitant click, Ethan opened the first file. The voice of Marcus Harding filled the room, cold and calculating. "Sign the contract, kid. It's your only chance. Once you sign, your voice, your talent, it all belongs to me." A chorus of young, desperate voices followed, each telling a similar tale of shattered dreams and broken promises. Ethan's stomach churned, recognizing the pattern of manipulation and exploitation. "No, no, no," murmured Ethan, his voice choked by growing disappointment and anger. "How could I have considered this?" His phone vibrated with a new message. It was Marcus once again. "Ethan, time is running out. I need your signature on that contract today. Don't throw away this opportunity. Ethan tossed the phone onto the bed, his hands trembling. Marcus's pressure was relentless, but now, with these new revelations, the decision seemed even more impossible. The sound of a door opening tore him from his turbulent thoughts. Familiar footsteps, long unheard, echoed down the hallway. Ethan froze, immediately recognizing the cadence. "Ethan?" The voice of his father, Robert Collins, sounded hesitant, almost strange after years of absence. Ethan stood abruptly, the chair scraping noisily against the floor. "What are you doing here?" His voice trembled, a mix of surprise and resentment. I came to help," Robert replied, stepping into the room. "I heard about Sarah, about everything you're going through." The tension in the air was palpable, electrified by the unspoken history between father and son. Ethan laughed bitterly, a rough sound that scratched his own throat. "Help now, after all these years?" Robert sighed heavily, the sound laden with regret. "I know I made mistakes, son, but I'm here now. I can offer financial help. In exchange for what?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising dangerously. A heavy silence settled before Robert responded, "Custody of Sarah." The words struck like lightning, electrifying the already charged air of the room. Ethan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach, the air escaping his lungs in an incredulous hiss. You want to take Sarah away from me?" Ethan's voice trembled, a mix of disbelief and rising fury. "After everything we've been through, after you abandoned us, you think you can just come back and take her?" Robert raised his hands in a pacifying gesture, but his voice held a note of determination. "Ethan, be reasonable. You're too young to handle all this alone. Sarah needs constant care, resources that I can provide." Anger bubbled within Ethan, spilling over into words sharp as razors. "Reasonable? You talk about being reasonable after leaving us with nothing, after disappearing when we needed you most?" Voices rose, years of hurt and resentment exploding in a cacophony of accusations and justifications. The sound of their argument echoed through the thin walls of the house, a discordant symphony of a fractured family. Amid the chaos, Ethan's cell phone vibrated insistently. With trembling hands, he answered, recognizing Lily's number. "Ethan?" Lily's voice was choked, cut through with barely contained sobs. I need to tell you something." Ethan's heart sank further, sensing more bad news. "Lily, what happened?" "My family," she choked between tears. "We're being deported. I don't know what to do, Ethan. Please help me." Lily's words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach, robbing him of breath. He staggered to the bed, sitting down heavily as the world seemed to spin around him. "Deported? But how? When?" The questions came out in a stunned whisper. Lily continued, her voice broken by emotion. "It's complicated. Something about my father's documents. Ethan, I'm scared. I don't want to leave everything behind." Lily's pleas for help echoed in Ethan's ears, mixing with his father's demands still present in the room and the shocking revelations about Marcus. It felt as if the world was crumbling around him, every pillar of his life threatening to collapse. That night, alone in his room, Ethan picked up his guitar. His fingers strummed the strings almost of their own accord, giving voice to the storm of emotions consuming him. The melody that emerged was raw, anguished, a composition born from pain and betrayal. As he played, Ethan began to sing, his voice initially a hoarse whisper that grew in intensity and emotion. In a world of lies, where to trust? When those we love make us bleed broken promises, shattered dreams, an uncertain future, a tainted present. His voice broke on the last note, silent tears streaming down his face. The music echoed through the empty room, a sonic testimony to a broken heart and a tormented soul. Ethan remained there, motionless with the guitar, as the last chords faded into the air. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the weight of the impossible decisions awaiting him. The hospital was cold and smelled of cleaning products. Ethan walked through the white corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The machines beeped incessantly, reminding Ethan that every minute was crucial. As he turned a corner, Ethan came face to face with Dr. Reeves, the head of the hospital. The man adjusted his glasses and looked at Ethan with a serious expression. "Mr. Collins," he said, "we need to talk about your mother." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. Has something happened to my mom? Dr. Reeves sighed, shuffling some papers. The sound of the pages made Ethan feel even worse. "Mr. Collins, the hospital has been patient, but we can't continue treating your mother if there's no payment." Ethan felt like he had been punched. "But she needs this treatment. She could die without it." "I'm sorry," Dr. Reeves replied, his voice cold. "If we don't receive the money by the end of the week, we will have to stop the treatment." Ethan had barely processed this news when his phone rang. It was Marcus. "Ethan?" Marcus's voice sounded cold over the phone. "I'm running out of patience. I need your answer now. Sign the contract and your money problems are over. Think about your mother." Marcus's words mixed with the noise of the machines in his mother's room, making Ethan's head spin. "I need more time," Ethan stuttered, feeling cornered. "Time is something you don't have, kid," Marcus replied sharply. "It's now or never." Before Ethan could respond, he heard someone calling his name. It was Lily, running towards him, tears in her eyes. "Ethan!" she cried out, her voice full of fear. "Please, I need your help. My family. They're going to send us out of the country in 3 days if we can't get money for the lawyers." Lily's desperate plea joined Marcus's voice on the phone, creating a mess of voices in Ethan's head. As if that wasn't enough, Ethan saw his father, Robert, coming down the corridor with a determined look. "Son?" Robert began, his voice deep. "I've thought about what we discussed. I can pay for all of Sarah's treatment, but on one condition. She comes to live with me after she leaves the hospital. It's best for everyone." Ethan's head was a mess. Marcus asking him to sign the contract, Lily begging for help, his father wanting his mother to live with him, and the noise of the machines reminding him that his mother was very ill. In the midst of it all, Ethan's phone vibrated with a message. It was from the school, reminding him of the benefit concert for Mrs. Martinez that night. Ethan felt more guilt. His teacher, battling cancer, was counting on him to sing at the concert. The clock on the hospital wall seemed to mock Ethan. Each tick was like a hammer strike, reminding him that time was running out. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to think straight, but the voices wouldn't stop. Marcus. "Sign the contract, Ethan. It's your only way out." Lily. "Please, Ethan. My family needs you." Robert. "Be sensible, son. Let me take care of your mother." Dr. Reeves. "Time is running out, Mr. Collins." And amidst all this, Ethan remembered his mother's weak voice. "Do what you need to, Ethan. Don't give up on your dreams for my sake." Ethan was a bundle of nerves. His hands trembled. He breathed rapidly and shallowly. He felt the cold sweat on his back and his heart pounding in his chest. I don't know what to do," Ethan spoke softly, almost voicelessly. At that moment, Ethan's phone rang again. It was the director of the music school. "Ethan?" The director's voice sounded worried. "We need to know if you're going to sing at the concert for Mrs. Martinez tonight. Everyone is counting on you." Ethan felt more guilt. Mrs. Martinez, who always believed in him, was now ill. She deserved for him to be there, singing. But how could he go when so many other things needed him? The clock continued ticking, reminding Ethan that he needed to decide soon. The final audition for Marcus, which could solve his money problems. But at what cost? The concert for Mrs. Martinez, a chance to thank someone who had helped him so much. The urgent need to help Lily and her family. His father's tempting yet difficult offer. Ethan found himself in the midst of a multitude of difficult choices. Each choice would change his life forever. The noise of the clock mixed with the sound of the machines and the voices around him, creating a mess of pressure and indecision. He looked to the room where his mother was, to the worried face of Lily, to the serious expression of his father. He thought of Marcus, Mrs. Martinez, everyone who needed him in some way. Time was running out. Ethan knew he had to make a choice, a decision that would affect not only his future, but that of everyone around him. With a heavy heart and a full head, he prepared to make his decision, knowing that whatever he chose, nothing would be the same afterward. The hospital corridor suddenly became quiet. Everyone looked at Ethan, waiting for him to speak. The silence was so intense that Ethan's rapidly beating heart could be heard. Ethan took a deep breath and looked around at everyone. His father, Lily, the doctor, and thought of his mother in the next room. Then he spoke, his voice firm despite the fear he felt. "I will not sign the contract with Marcus. I will not let my mother move in with my father. And yes, I will sing at Mrs. Martinez's concert tonight." For a moment, no one said anything. Then, suddenly, everyone began to speak at once. "You're throwing your chance away," Marcus's voice shouted over the phone. "Son, you're not thinking straight," his father said, shaking his head. Other voices joined in, some supporting Ethan, others criticizing his decision. The noise grew louder, like an out-of-tune orchestra. Ethan raised his hands, asking for silence. "I know it seems crazy," he said, "but I have a plan. I'm going to use Mrs. Martinez's concert to tell our story. I'll sing about our town, about the people who need help, about my mother, about Lily and her family, about all of us." Voices continued, some louder, some softer. Ethan could hear anger in his father's voice, disappointment in Marcus's. But he also heard words of support from people he didn't know were listening. "You're throwing away your mother's future!" his father yelled, his face red with anger. Ethan turned to him, feeling a courage he didn't know he had. "No, Dad. I'm fighting for her future, for our future, the right way." Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos of voices. It was an alarm coming from his mother's room. Ethan's heart froze. Everyone fell silent as doctors and nurses rushed into the room. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Ethan stood still, barely breathing, listening to the muffled sounds of voices and machines coming from his mother's room. Then, when Ethan thought he couldn't take it anymore, he heard something that surprised him. Laughter. Laughter and the sound of applause coming from his mother's room. The door opened and Dr. Reeves came out, a big smile on his face. "Mr. Collins," he said, "I can't explain it, but your mother, she woke up, and she's asking for you." The news took everyone by surprise. People around started to celebrate. Ethan felt tears streaming down his face, but this time they were tears of relief and happiness. Without thinking twice, Ethan ran to his mother's room. Inside, he saw her sitting up in bed, looking tired but with a smile on her face. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "My son," Sarah replied, extending her hand to him. "I heard everything. I'm so proud of you." Ethan held his mother's hand, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Mom, I promise I'll make everything work out. I'm going to sing tonight and tell our story. We're going to get help." Sarah smiled, squeezing Ethan's hand. "I know you will, my love. I always knew." That night, the small-town theater was packed. People from all over the community had come for Mrs. Martinez's benefit concert. When it was Ethan's turn to perform, he stepped onto the stage with his heart pounding. He looked at the audience and saw familiar faces. Lily and her family, his father in the back of the room. Even Marcus was there, arms crossed and a serious expression on his face. Ethan took a deep breath and began to sing. His voice, clear and strong, filled the theater. He sang about his town, about the struggles everyone faced. He sang about his mother, about the fear of losing her and the joy of seeing her improve. He sang about Lily and her family, about the fear of being sent away from their home. As he sang, Ethan could see people's expressions changing. He saw tears in some eyes, smiles on other faces. He saw his father lower his head, shoulders shaking with emotion. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence. Then, like a wave, the applause started. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Ethan saw Lily jumping for joy, his father clapping with a smile on his face. Even Marcus seemed impressed. After the show, while people were still talking excitedly about the performance, Ethan returned to the hospital. He entered his mother's room, finding her awake and smiling. "How did it go, my son?" Sarah asked, her voice weak but full of love. Ethan sat beside her bed, holding his mother's hand. "It was amazing, Mom. I think we did it. People understood. They want to help." Sarah smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I knew you would make it, Ethan. You have a special gift." Ethan felt his own tears falling. "I promise to use that gift for good, Mom. I'll keep singing, telling our stories, and I'll take care of you." Sarah squeezed Ethan's hand. "And I'll be here to see it all, my love. We'll get through this together." They stayed there, mother and son, laughing and crying together. Outside, the sun began to rise, bringing a new day full of hope and possibility.